Isaac Newton was born in the village of Woolsthorpe on the eve of the Civil War. His father, Isaac Newton Sr. (1606–1642), a small but prosperous farmer, did not live to see the birth of his son. The boy was born prematurely and was frail, which led to delays in his baptism. Nevertheless, he survived, was baptized on January 1, and named Isaac in memory of his father. Newton considered the fact that he was born around Christmas to be a special sign of fate. Despite his weak health in infancy, he lived to be 84 years old. Newton sincerely believed that his lineage traced back to Scottish nobility of the 15th century, but historians have found that in 1524, his ancestors were poor peasants. By the end of the 16th century, the family had become wealthy and moved into the ranks of yeoman landowners. Newton's father left a substantial inheritance of £500 and several hundred acres of fertile land, occupied by fields and forests. In January 1646, Newton's mother, Anna Askew, remarried Barnabas Smith. From her new husband, a 63-year-old widower, she had 3 children: Mary Smith born 1647, Benjamin Smith born 1651, and Hannah Smith, who became the wife of Robert Barton. She began to pay little attention to Isaac. The boy was taken under the wing of his maternal uncle, William Askew. As a child, Newton was reportedly quiet, withdrawn, and isolated, preferring to read and craft technical toys such as sundials, water clocks, and mills. Throughout his life, he felt lonely. His stepfather died in 1653, and part of his inheritance went to Newton's mother, who immediately transferred it to Isaac. She returned home but focused mainly on her 3 younger children and the extensive household, leaving Isaac largely to fend for himself. In 1655, the 12-year-old Newton was sent to a nearby school in Grantham, where he lived with the apothecary Clark. Soon, the boy showed exceptional abilities, but in 1659, his mother Anna brought him back to the estate and tried to assign him some of the responsibilities of managing the household. This attempt failed. Isaac preferred reading books, writing poetry, and especially constructing various mechanisms. During this time, Stokes, Newton's schoolteacher, approached Anna and began to persuade her to continue the education of her exceptionally gifted son. This request was supported by Uncle William and Isaac's acquaintance from Grantham, Humphrey Babington, a member of Trinity College, Cambridge. Through their combined efforts, they eventually succeeded. In 1661, Newton graduated from school and went on to continue his education at Cambridge University. In June 1661, the 18-year-old Newton arrived in Cambridge. According to the regulations, he was examined in Latin, after which he was informed that he was admitted to Trinity College. This institution would be linked to more than 30 years of Newton's life. The college, like the entire university, was going through difficult times. The monarchy had just been restored in England, 1660. King Charles II frequently delayed necessary payments to the university, and dismissed a significant portion of the teaching staff appointed during the Revolution. A total of 400 people lived in Trinity College, including students, servants, and 20 beggars, to whom the college was obliged to provide alms according to its charter. The educational process was in a deplorable state. Newton was classified as a sizar student, who did not have to pay tuition fees, probably by recommendation of Babington. According to the norms of the time, a sizar was required to pay for his education through various work at the university or by providing services to wealthier students. Very few documentary evidence and memories of this period of his life have survived. During these years, Newton's character was finally shaped. His desire to get to the essence of things, intolerance of deceit, slander, and oppression, and indifference to public fame. He still had no friends. In April 1664, Newton passed his exams and advanced to a higher category of upperclassmen, which entitled him to a scholarship and the continuation of his studies at the college. Despite Galileo's discoveries, natural philosophy and science were still taught in Cambridge according to Aristotle. However, Newton's surviving notebooks already mention Galileo, Copernicus, Cartesian philosophy, Kepler, and Gassendy's atomic theory. Judging by these notebooks, he continued to craft mostly scientific instruments, was passionately engaged in optics, astronomy, mathematics, phonetics, and music theory. According to the recollections of a roommate, Newton devoted himself utterly to his studies, forgetting about food and sleep. Despite all the hardships, this was likely the way of life he desired. The year 1664 was rich in other events for Newton. He experienced a creative surge, began independent scientific work, and compiled an extensive list of 45 items of unresolved problems in nature and human life. In March of that year, lectures began at the recently established 1663 Chair of Mathematics at the college, led by a new lecturer, 34-year-old Isaac Barrow, a prominent mathematician and future friend and teacher of Newton. Newton's interest in mathematics grew significantly. He made his first significant mathematical discovery, the binomial expansion for any rational exponent, including negative, and through it, he arrived at his principal mathematical method, the expansion of functions in an infinite series. By the end of the year, Newton became a bachelor. The scientific support and inspiration for Newton's work were largely provided by physicists, Galileo, Descartes, and Kepler. Newton completed their work, uniting it into a universal system of the world. Lesser but still significant influences came from other mathematicians and physicists, Euclid, Fermat, Huygens, Wallis, and his direct teacher Barrow. In Newton's student notebook, there is a programmatic phrase. On the eve of Christmas 1664, red crosses began to appear on London houses, the first marks of the Great Plague epidemic. By summer, the deadly epidemic had significantly expanded. On August 8, 1665, classes at Trinity College were suspended, and staff was dismissed until the end of the epidemic. Newton returned home to Woolsthorpe, taking with him his essential books, notebooks, and tools. These were dire years for England. Devastating plague in London alone, a fifth of the population perished, ruinous war with the Netherlands, and the Great Fire of London. However, Newton made a significant portion of his scientific discoveries in the solitude of the plague years. Surviving notes show that 23-year-old Newton was already well versed in the basic methods of differential and integral calculus, including the expansion of functions into series and what would later be known as Newton's formula, Leibniz. After conducting a series of clever optical experiments, he proved that the white color is a mixture of the colors of the spectrum. Newton later recalled these years. But his most significant discovery during this time was the law of universal gravitation. Later, in 1686, Newton wrote to Halley, noting an inaccuracy stemming from the fact that he took the Earth's dimensions and the gravitational acceleration from Galileo's mechanics, where they had significant errors. Newton later obtained more precise data from Picard and ultimately confirmed the truth of his theory. The well-known legend has it that Newton discovered the law of gravitation after observing an apple fall from a tree branch. The first mention of Newton's apple was made by Newton's biographer William Stukeley in his book, Memoirs of the Life of Newton, 1752. The legend became popular thanks to Voltaire. In reality, as seen from Newton's working notebooks, his theory of universal gravitation developed gradually. Another biographer, Henry Pemberton, provides a more detailed account of Newton's reasoning without mentioning the apple. Comparing the periods of several planets and their distances from the Sun, he discovered that this force must diminish in a quadratic proportion with the increase in distance. In other words, Newton found that from Kepler's third law, which links the periods of planets to their distances from the Sun, follows the inverse square law for gravitation in the approximation of circular orbits. The final formulation of the law of gravitation, which would enter textbooks, was written by Newton later, after the laws of mechanics became clear to him. These discoveries, as well as many later ones, were published 20 to 40 years later than they were made. Newton was not in pursuit of fame. In 1670, he wrote to John Collins, "I see nothing desirable in fame, even if I were able to earn it. It would perhaps increase the number of my acquaintances, but that is precisely what I most strive to avoid." His first scientific work, October 1666, which outlined the foundations of analysis, was never published. It was only found 300 years later. In March-June 1666, Newton visited Cambridge. However, in the summer, a new wave of plague forced him to leave home again. Finally, At the beginning of 1667, the epidemic subsided, and in April, Newton returned to Cambridge. On October 1, he was elected a Fellow of Trinity College, and in 1668 he became a master. He was given a spacious separate room for living, assigned a salary £2 a year, and handed a group of students with whom he diligently taught standard subjects for several hours a week. However, neither then nor later did Newton gain fame as a teacher. His lectures were poorly attended. Having secured his position, Newton made a trip to London, where shortly before, in 1660, the Royal Society had been established, a prestigious organization of prominent scientific figures, one of the first academies of sciences. The printed organ of the Royal Society was the journal, Philosophical Transactions. In 1669, mathematical works using expansions in infinite series began to appear in Europe. Although these discoveries were not comparable in depth to Newton's, Barrow insisted that his student establish his priority in this matter. Newton wrote a brief but sufficiently complete summary of this part of his discoveries, which he called, Analysis by Equations with an Infinite Number of Terms. Barrow sent this treatise to London. Newton asked Barrow not to reveal the author's name, but he did anyway. The Analysis circulated among specialists and gained some recognition in England and beyond. In the same year, Barrow accepted a royal appointment to return to Trinity as its head master. Second, Newton's mathematical discoveries caught the attention of Leibniz, who at that time was known as a philosopher and inventor. After receiving Newton's 1669 work on infinite series and studying it deeply, he independently began developing his version of analysis. In 1676, Newton and Leibniz exchanged letters in which Newton explained some of his methods, answered Leibniz's questions, and hinted at the existence of even more general methods that had not yet been published, referring to general differential and integral calculus. The Secretary of the Royal Society, Henry Oldenburg, persistently urged Newton to publish his mathematical discoveries on analysis for the glory of England, but Newton replied that he had already been working on another topic for 5 years and did not want to be distracted. He did not respond to Leibniz's next letter. The first brief publication of Newton's version of analysis appeared only in 1693, when Leibniz's version had already spread widely across Europe. The late 1670s were bleak for Newton. In May 1677, Barrow, 47 years old, died unexpectedly. That winter, a severe fire broke out in Newton's house, destroying part of his handwritten archive. In September 1677, Newton's supporter, the Secretary of the Royal Society, Oldenburg, died, and the new secretary, Hooke, had an unfriendly attitude towards Newton. In 1679, Newton's mother, Anna, fell seriously ill. Newton left all his affairs and went to care for her, but her condition deteriorated quickly, and she passed away. His mother and Barrow were among the few people who lightened Newton's solitude.